Thank you, Serena. Thank you to the President. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to De Costa. And I so agree that we are in a very important moment. So I'm very honored to join you at this critical moment, to be here for the opening of this fair, which, as the President said, is not just another Sana. It is showing that another world is possible, and it's a better world. The world that has given us the multiple crises that we face is based on assumptions that are unscientific, assumptions that are undemocratic, assumptions that are outmoded. They should have died 100 years ago. And yet, there is a small group of people who gain. We don't need toxic pesticides of the kind that killed 3,000 people in one night on 2nd December 1984 in the city of Bhopal. Pesticides that are pushing such large numbers to ill health. There's a part of India called the Punjab, which means the land of the 5 rivers. And you know, your Sana has infected my hands too, because my pen leaked and made my hands green, so that I would be green with your gardens and your forests. Punjab is prosperous land, land of 5 rivers. It was chosen in 1965 to be the land of the Green Revolution. But that was not the color green of the gardens, and it was not the color green of diversity. Today, half of Punjab soils are dead. The farmers are so angry that in 1984, they started the worst kind of extremist violence. 30,000 people were killed. That's 6 9/11s. 6 times 9/11. And the violence could only be stopped by sending the army in, which made the people so angry that they then assassinated our Prime Minister of that time, Indira Gandhi. And interestingly, Sonia, who's gone to USA for treatment, has been summoned by a court related to that 1984 entry of the Golden Temple and the killing of the Sikhs. So we have one kind of agriculture that leads to violence at every level. Today, farmers of Punjab are committing suicide. Worst, there's a train that leaves Punjab, which is called the cancer train. The textbooks still talk about the miracle. The propagandists still come to India to say how India was moved out of famine by these chemicals. The reality is there's a cancer train that leaves, full of cancer victims. Punjab is dying, its soil is dying, its people are dying, its farmers are dying, its children are dying. But because of the way this monoculture of the mind, as I've described it, very conveniently shuts out the real costs. The real costs of a violent agriculture to the earth. The real costs of a violent agriculture to our health. The real cost to our communities. It is constantly promoted as a prosperous, productive agriculture. The reason I don't do physics anymore and have dedicated my life to biodiversity protection and organic farming for the last 30 years and more is because that lie of destructive agriculture being the solution to hunger and poverty is such a big lie, and it's costing too much. 75% of all water being destroyed on the planet is because of chemicals. Plants don't need that much water. Organic soil conserves water, but chemically fertilized soil has 0 water holding capacity and very high demands for water. So water is disappearing. 90% of the biodiversity of agriculture has disappeared with industrial agriculture. And in Europe, Italy and Greece are the remaining places where decent food is still available because the seeds are still available, because your agriculture is shaped by the care for the earth and care for people, and respect and dignity and love and pride. Most of the soils that are chemically industrially farms are degraded. They're not soils anymore, they have no life. Right now, I have left India during a month-long period where we offer 1-month course on the A to Z of organic farming and ecological agriculture at our Earth University on the Navdanya farm in Dehradun. We look at living soil because industrial agriculture treats soil as dead, inert matter, only a holding place for plants or a container for chemical fertilizer, when it is the richest source of biodiversity and is the source of its own fertility. Living soils gives us all the micronutrients and trace elements. Chemical farming is based on nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So it's no wonder our children don't get enough magnesium and then they have attention deficit disorders. It's no wonder there's calcium deficiency, more and more and more. Our food has no nutrition. It is nutritionally empty, tasteless mass. The ultimate victory of Cartesian thought, of the world being just mass and dimension. No, the world is life, quality, diversity. And a good agriculture recognizes that. I noticed as we walked in, there's a calculation of how much CO2 emission reduction is taking place because of the gardens and forests that have been created here. In the International Commission of the Future of Food at the time of Copenhagen, we issued a manifesto on the links between food security and climate change. I wrote a book called Soil Not Oil. 40% of all greenhouse gases are coming from a destructive agriculture. The same agriculture that destroys soil and biodiversity and people's health is also responsible for destabilizing the climate. We know what this destabilization means. I come from the Himalaya. The monsoons start around mid-June. And usually the rains start building up and then they peak and then they slow down. This year, because of climate instability, the peak came on day 1, 16th of June. And because of the way a bad idea of development is treating the rivers only as sources of energy, not as sources of life, the rivers have been dammed, they've been put into tunnels, the tunnels have used dynamite to blast, the mountains are all cracked, and that heavy rain came, and mountains started to collapse. The dumping led to the rise in riverbeds, the rivers were in flood, washed away places that have existed for 1,500, 2,000 years, they've been stable. And one season of climate instability has created such a disaster, I cannot see how long it will take for nature to recover. It takes 500 years for 1 inch of soil to build. We can't even begin to calculate how much soil we've lost. We've lost 20,000 people. 20,000 people died. Navdanya, whose work is gardening and saving seeds, is having to build homes and is having to build cables because roads and bridges have been washed away and people are totally disconnected. So the costs of this destructive agriculture are very, very high. Very high for the people who don't get access to food in this greed-based system, but very high even for those who eat. You just have to go to the United States or to the towns in what are called the emerging economies to see the disease of obesity. 25% of Indian children in the cities are now obese because junk food is promoting as the next step of progress. And of course, how does it become cheap? It becomes cheap because of tax concessions. A fast food chain doesn't have to pay taxes. That tiny street vendor has to get taxes paid. At every level, it's an uneven playing field. The FAO calculated on 5th of June, which is World Environment Day, and this year it was celebrated as the year for food and stopping wastage of food and food safety. FAO has calculated $4.3 trillion of damage because of ill health related to obesity. But we never count that. The huge cap subsidies are never counted in the real costs of industrial agriculture. And then organic is always made to look artificially costly when it's industrial chemical farming that we can't afford to practice. We can't afford to practice it because of the harm it's doing to the planet. It is 75% of ecological destruction everywhere. We can't afford to promote it in a time where the economic crisis has led to such huge losses of employment, and the corporations and the banks are not going to employ the people they displaced. There's only one employer who can give enough work, creative work, meaningful work to all of humanity, old and young, rich and poor alike. And that is the work of gardening. All the photos of the urban gardens of Bologna show where people are happy. Put a little child with dirt and with some seeds and show me a miserable child while they're gardening. Never. I know so many people, friends, whose parents have got Alzheimer's. The only thing the parents can do is garden. Isn't it wonderful that the seed keeps your memory alive to relate to the plant, even when your memory is going in everything else? In Vandana, we've created community seed banks. We've trained more than 750,000 farmers, and my dream is within the next few years to have 1 million strong farmers trained in organic farming. Just yesterday, I was to have been with the agriculture minister of one of our states. I couldn't go because of my illness, but my colleagues went. We are working state by state, region by region. At least 5 regions of India have committed themselves to an organic transition. Bhutan has committed itself to 100% organic transition. And I know if there's one part of Europe and the West that could do it, it is Italy. Italy deserves to be 100% organic for the sake of its youth, for the sake of its future, but also for the sake of its past, because it has so much to give. Our Vandana International team, and all my colleagues are here, Maria Grazia, Caroline, Ruchi, we're working with Rome. Rome has decided the way to get out of the unemployment crisis for youth is to create gardens everywhere. You supply good and safe food, but you create work. The dominant system would like to address the crisis that it has created by saying the pensions of older people should be knocked out, all the work security should go. That's the debate I notice when I come to Italy, pitting the young against the old, pitting the children against the parent, as if it's the parents who are the children's worst enemy. But our real solution is maintain the security of those who've given their lives to serve society and create new imagination for the security of the future, not by creating a common insecurity where no one knows what the future looks like. And our common security can only come through building the security of the earth and biodiversity. Because one of the other illusions of the old paradigm was we are separate from nature. And we can be masters of nature. And every time I see an ecological disaster, it is a result of man's arrogance that he is a more powerful force than the forces of nature. When we see the power of the rivers in this monsoon season in the Himalaya, these ideas that the rivers can be imprisoned in dams and in tunnels looks like such a trivial idea. Because in one day, every dam was washed away and every tunnel collapsed. Tunnels that had made the mountains collapsed themselves. But this arrogance is so intense in the area of seed, in the area of agriculture. We have 5 companies trying to control the seed. Not by bringing us better seed, not by bringing us seed that we want, but by bringing us bad seed which nobody wants, GMO seeds, only because it's the only way they can claim patents on it, and their only interest is to collect royalties from seed. They want to be lifelords on the planet. Like in older times, in feudal times, our societies used to have landlords, where the peasants worked and the landlords got the revenues. India, through landlordism introduced by the British, supported all of the British Empire on the backs of the sweat and blood of the Indian peasant. And in 1942, 2 million people died in Bengal because for the war, the British were extracting the last grain of rice and not allowing the peasants who had grown it to eat the rice themselves. And the women, peasants of Bengal, started a movement, a beautiful movement. They would stand there in front of the military and police, armed with guns, and all the women had was broomsticks in their hands. And their slogan was, Jaan debo, dhaan debo now. We will give our lives. You can kill us and shoot us. We will not give our rice. That's how our food sovereignty was built back. 1942, the year of the famine, is when we told the British, quit India. It's time for you to quit India. And we became independent in 1947. From the day Monsanto entered India in 1998, 97-98 season, we started a movement, Monsanto quit India. We don't need you. We can do better farming without you. What has Monsanto brought us? 4 crops, genetically modified, 2 traits, Bt toxin, Roundup resistant. We used to eat 8,500 species of plants, and we've been reduced to growing 4 genetically modified crops, which get used first for running cars and torturing animals, and the leftovers go to human beings. 10% of the corn and soya feeds people, and yet we maintain the myth that industrial agriculture feeds the world. 72% of the food people eat comes from small farms and gardens. This is FAO data today. It doesn't take much to move that 72% to 100% through another model of farming and agriculture. Gardens everywhere, rather than deserts everywhere. Because what industrial agriculture is creating is deserts. I have seen my own country. Punjab is a desert, the most fertile land. 5 years you farm chemically and then the soil is gone. And then you move on or abandon farming. The Amazon has been turned into a desert. Argentina, only Roundup resistant soya. Argentina is a green desert today. No other crop can grow. They spray Roundup from the air, so nothing else can grow. Nobody's kitchen gardens can survive. Children are dying because of the poisoning by the Roundup and the glyphosate. So an agriculture that started in war continues a war against the earth and people. Agriculture that has been built over 10,000 years by making peace with the earth, continues to give us more food, better food, more nutrition, more health. In Navdanya, we promote biodiversity-based agriculture. And our research is showing that the more biodiversity there is, the more food and nutrition there is. Whereas the monoculture of the mind assumes that you have to destroy biodiversity in order to have more food. So we don't calculate yield, which is a single commodity, and we don't know where that commodity goes. We calculate health and nutrition per acre, because that is what food is for. Food is for feeding and nourishing people. Food is for feeding and nourishing soil organisms. Food is for feeding and nourishing our animals, our pollinators. If our crops have Bt toxin, that toxin will kill the bees and butterflies. It will kill the soil organisms. It is killing animals, and now the research is showing it is so very harmful to human health. Dr. Seralini did research for 2 years, huge tumors because of the GMO feed in the rats that he used. Dr. Arpat Putsa in '98 did studies. The brains had shrunk, the pancreas had expanded, the immunity had collapsed, and the intestinal lining was so damaged that he said this is the early stages of cancer, which is what Seralini's studies now showed. So what does the GMO industry do? Hound out each of these independent scientists working for public universities so that their fraudulent propaganda that GMO feeds the world can carry on. Today, I do not hesitate to say from this public platform that the challenge for SANA, the challenge for Expo 15, is to break the dictatorship of these criminal corporations. Because political dictatorships can be reversed, and you're a good example. Germany is a good example. You change the political structure, you can create new political structures. But this ecological dictatorship over life cannot be reversed. Those species that disappear are gone forever. The farmers who have died are gone. 284,000 Indian farmers have been pushed to suicide because of debt. And the debt is highest in the GMO cotton areas. 284,000, more than 250,000. We can't bring them back. The best we can do is with the widows, cultivate gardens of hope. You know, in India, a month ago, 23 children died in Bihar because of pesticide poisoning in the lunch meal. Wouldn't have happened if the food was growing next door. Food safety is about democracy, about knowing how the food was grown, where it was grown. Food safety is not about another layer of dictatorship. Now, in the name of food safety, I am so surprised that in the name of safety, it's not the Agriculture Commission, it's not the Environment Commission, but it's the Commission on Consumer Affairs and Safety that brings out this new regulation, which has a nice convoluted name. When Monsanto wants to say, I will be the owner of seed, it doesn't say I'll own the seed. It'll say, I'll have intellectual property rights on seed. So no one can figure out what this is about. But it is about owning the seed and on the basis that you have invented it. And I found that so wrong. That's why I started Navdanya and the 9-seed movement. This is a seed law, but you don't find the word seed. The title is on the production and making available on the market of plant reproductive material. Plant reproductive material law. Seed has been turned into raw material. Its life has been taken out. This law is a design to make us forget the source of our food, to make us forget our heritage, our memory. And that's why I hope that in the European Parliament, every part of the Parliament that is impacted by issues of seed and food, the rural development, the environmental committees, the agriculture committees, should all say this is our business to look at it. They cannot define this little piece and say you will only look here. I was reading it last night while waiting to take my flight. And it's an interesting law because in my view, Europe is based on subsidiarity. This law is based on centralization. What locally can be done, only allow Brussels to do. If you can find out what's good seed because 5 generations of farmers have used it, why should Brussels decide? Something's wrong. But worse, they've tried to put all the laws related to different kind of planting material together. Forests so far have been managed differently from agriculture. But they would like a time where you would have to get their regulated seed, both for your rainforest and the gardens. It's a law to restrict biodiversity. You can't have biodiversity and conservation varieties, as they call them, in more than a certain trivial area. At a time where we know, first, that we have an obligation because of the Convention on Biological Diversity. We know because of the International Assessment on Agricultural Science and Technology for Development that biodiverse systems produce more. And in fact, a law of 2013 that was visionary, future-oriented, democratically driven would say all of Europe's agriculture should be based on biodiversity. Not 0.5 and 0.1 and 1%. How can you restrict the good and legalize the criminal? Either it's crimes against nature and biodiversity or crimes against small farmers. They talk about the beautiful varieties of tomatoes that are growing there, the wonderful semidizuka from the custodians of this region, which I am going to share with you for your gardens. These are nourishing varieties, they're production varieties, they're conservation varieties, it's everything in one. But by trivializing them and saying they're conservation varieties, it's made to look like they don't feed people. But every variety that is an old variety is also a food and a basis of another food system. A basis of a food system that is based on diversity, on sustainability, on health, on taste, on nutrition. Very, very obsolete category that is being perpetuated and imposed on every seed of Europe. And when it's done in Europe through the EU-India trade treaty, they'll impose it on India. I know that's already happening. The foreign minister of Netherlands was meeting me day before, and she was saying, what are your concerns? I said, that's my concern. You should be introducing diversity learning from India rather than imposing uniformity on India's farms. Now, all of this forced registration and certification of seed is based on a very artificial criteria of uniformity. As if uniformity in agriculture is good, when we know it is the reason pests grow. We know it's the reason there's more pesticides. We know it's the reason there's more vulnerability to climate change and drought and floods. But they call it positive. We have drafted collectively in Vandana the law of the seed, which should be available, Maria Grazia is on a table at the back, and we ask each of you to take it. It's in Italian. It was drafted by the top participatory breeders, the head of the FAO, Plant Genetic Resources Commission, Pepe Esquinas, who did all the treaty on plant genetic resources, 2 lawyers who have fought cases against patenting and the seed laws, Dr. Dolder, who has worked on our cases of biopiracy, and a young lawyer called Blanche who fought the Kokopelli case. And that collective drafting with the Navdanya team, the law of the seed is based not on uniformity but on diversity, because diversity is the way for sustainability. Diversity is the way for freedom. Diversity is the only way we can farm if we have to use less land and produce more, because as I said, there's more health per acre and more nutrition per acre when we pack more diversity into our gardens and our farms. There's another category, VCU. They love acronyms. What is VCU? Value for cultivation and use. Who determines the value? To me, the real value of cultivation and use is in these gardens. Not on the industrial monocultures requiring half of Europe's money at a time of crisis to keep flooding our farms with chemicals and toxics, making small farms more and more unviable because of the unleavened playing field created by these subsidies for bigger machinery, bigger debts, bigger fossil fuel use. Real value for cultivation and use comes from the value of the nutrition. That is what should be getting looked at. Who will determine the value? Local communities, chefs, grandmothers, not the corporations who want a monopoly on the seed on the one hand and a control over agriculture on the other hand. We need to change the model of development and with it the model of farming. This proposed law is also an undermining of Italy's law, Tuscany's law. Maria Grazia is here. Tuscany actually developed a law putting indigenous farmers' varieties at the center of the law. The European law is trying to criminalize farmers' varieties and biodiversity. And if there is no diversity, there can't be good organic food. There can't be organic cultivation. They're assuming industrial farming is the norm, and organic can stay in a niche market. Our call from SANA, our call from Expo 15 has to be, organic has to be the norm. Toxic agriculture is a perversion. So for the last 2 years, we've been building up a global movement for seed freedom and food freedom. Because if the seed is not free, food can't be free either. If the seed is only GMO, if the seed has to be certified and registered on the norms of industry by Brussels, there can't be the freedom to have local gardens. Everyone will be running for permission all the time. I have done a civil disobedience for a German farmer in '95. He used to make the best wheat seeds and used to share it with his neighbors. Not sell it, just share it. And the authorities came and said, you are interfering in the market. Because they would like every one of those neighbors to be buying bad seeds. The same happened with Kokopelli, the French seed-saving group. And you know the judgment of the European Court of Justice. So last year we brought out this big report on seed freedom written from movements across the world, both the positive actions of seed saving as well as the resistance to negative law. From 2nd October to 16th October, we dedicate our energies to building seed freedom and food freedom. Because we have to do it every day. It's not that you can't garden the rest of the year. It's not that you can't save seeds the rest of the year. But when in that fortnight we collect our energies and bring it to focus, we just have that much more power. We empower each other. 2nd October is Gandhi's birth anniversary. I was inspired by Gandhi to start Navdanya, both in saving seed, because when the British ruled us, what did Gandhi do? He didn't say, I'm going to get a bigger cannon than yours and shoot you. He said, I'll pull out a spinning wheel. And said, we are colonized because you control our cotton, our indigo, and our cotton textiles. You dump, you take cheap raw materials from us, and dump clothing, so we can't make our own clothes, we'll make our own clothes, we'll spin. And the spinning wheel became our symbol of freedom. So when I realized what these corporations were doing to our seed and food, I thought, what is the spinning wheel of our times? And I realized it's the seed. Because today the corporations want to control life, not just clothing. They literally want to control life. And seed is the source of life. So if we can keep seed liberated, both in terms of its own evolutionary potential, as well as in terms of farmers' rights to have seed, communities' rights to have seeds, and eaters' rights to have good seed, food from good seed, then we have seed freedom. The second thing we learned from Gandhi was something he started practicing in 1901 when the apartheid regime was being put in place in South Africa. And they were saying everyone will be divided by race. Citizenship will be unequal. There'll be Indians, there'll be blacks, there'll be whites. And he said, no, we are one common citizenship, equal in our rights and equal in our dignity. And I refuse to wear this badge of my race. He then named this resistance through peaceful form, Satyagraha, the fight for truth. This is what inspired the civil rights movement in the United States. And if you notice in that photograph of Martin Luther King speaking, there are about 10 people around him with Gandhi topis. You know, these little white topis that come from India. Gandhi never wore them, but they call Gandhi topis because the peasants wore them. And the civil rights movement learned that unjust law should not be obeyed. That's what Gandhi said. As long as the superstition exists that unjust law must be obeyed, so long will slavery exist. He disobeyed in South Africa. He came and taught us how when the British tried to impose a salt law that we should not obey, civil rights movement realized racism has no moral legitimacy. And that's when Rosa Parks went and sat in a seat. She triggered a whole movement. Sana should trigger a whole movement for every unjust seed law that is creating the foundation of a non-sustainable, unhealthy food system. And it is part of our democratic challenge of today to identify those laws. Where are they being creeped in through? From above or from below or from the side? I know that all that the United States wants in the US-Europe free trade agreement is the right to push GMOs. Will European citizens allow a signing of a free trade agreement that undoes the last 25 years of work at every level, local, regional, even national, to say we don't want GMOs? And there's a new study, a very, very good study done by Jack Heinemann. He compared Europe and the United States. He said he can't compare the third world. Because he compared equal climates, equal economic status, to say, did GMOs contribute to prosperity in America? And on every indicator, Europe is better off. Incomes of farmers, productivity, sustainability, everything, because Europe did not adopt GMOs and America did. Jack Heinemann, recent, just a month-old study. So Europe is better off protecting its ways of farming. Italy is better off teaching the rest of Europe how to do better farming. And as I said, small-scale farms have fed us today. The more we increase gardens and small farms, the more food and nourishment we will have. Today, if 28% is coming from industrial farms, and industrial farms are destroying 75% of the planet, if they increase up to 30%, 33%, they will destroy all of the planet. There'll be nothing left to grow food with. No soil, no seed, no stable climate, no water. It's a recipe for not just hunger and starvation, it's a recipe for extinction. And we can't afford it. And the rate at which they want to push it, they want to do a very fast speed extinction. And that is why we want to end the fortnight of action this year by honoring real food heroes. Monsanto has given itself the World Food Prize for saving the world. And they'll give it in that week of World Food Day, which the FAO chose as 16th of October. It's globally celebrated. I'm just seeing that every one of your urban gardens is worthy of being a local food hero. The real food heroes who bring us real food, not the fake food heroes who bring us fake food. So I hope with Sana all the way up to Expo 15, together, all of us will sow the seeds of freedom, sow the seeds of sustainability, sow the seeds of justice, and sow the seeds of joy and hope. I'm with you in this endeavor. And here are the seeds for the garden.